Assalamu alaikum everyone. You are listening to episode 28 of the Muhammad Ghalan podcast with yours truly as the host. Before we get going on this, just a couple of announcements. As I mentioned last time, this podcast is now available on Stitcher. So I just found out recently that apparently not everybody uses iTunes for this stuff. So for those of you who use Stitcher, welcome. And for those of you who know people who don't use iTunes but use Stitcher, please let them know. Let your friends know, your family members know. If you find this podcast beneficial and feel like it should deserve more listenership, please spread the word. And speaking of spreading the word, one of the ways you can help out with this is by actually going to iTunes or Stitcher or whatever and leaving a review. However many stars you feel this deserves, and just a short kind of shout out of what you think about it. And I do try to go and check them out and see if there is anything that I can do or work on to make it better. So it'll be beneficial. And it also helps out make this podcast more visible. These ratings that you guys see, whether it's on YouTube, if you see this on YouTube with the video, like the video, subscribe. And if you're just using the podcast apps, please go to iTunes, rate it. All of that helps the ranking of the podcast. So if you think it's something that people should know about, I would really appreciate your help out in there. The second thing about that is if you would like to support this work outside of just spreading the word about it, if you have the financial means to support it, there are a couple of ways of doing that. You can either become a patron, so you can go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/Muhammad Ghalan, and pledge an amount, whatever amount you can, to help out with this stuff. Or you can become a member of Andalus Book Club at andalusonline.org. If you go and check that out, there's some member exclusive content there, as well as a monthly live webinar. At the time of recording this, I'm doing this a bit later than usual because I've been preparing for the webinar that's going to be happening Sunday, April 16th at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern time, on the Tao of Islam. It's a webinar that I've decided to re-record to redo because the original recording failed. And so it provides another opportunity for members who didn't make it last time to make it this time, and for me to also actually record this properly this time and upload it. So there are videos out there on Andalus Book Club. There's discussion forums on various books that we're reading, and a book list and all of that. So, and that's where I engage more actively with the audience. So with that, I think we can move on to the content of today's episode. Let's see how long we're going to go for, just because it's a bit late for me, but let's see. I actually had an interview, and that's what I want to talk about today. I had an interview with a South African radio station. Voice of the Cape is it the radio station called the Voice of the Cape, or the show? I'm not sure. But the brother that interviewed me from it said that it's the largest Muslim radio broadcast in South Africa, which is quite amazing. When he gave me the numbers, like 500,000 people listen to these guys. And so, mashallah, that's great. And I definitely feel honored and blessed for having been given the opportunity to get on that show. When that comes out, I'll let you guys know. Apparently it's scheduled to be released maybe Friday, April 4th or whatever date that falls on. And we talked about a couple of things, and I wanted to basically address some of the points, or share with you some of the points that I talked about in it, but on my own show, on my own podcast, in case you don't manage to listen to it over there. And one of the things that he asked me at first was, what do you think is the biggest challenge for Muslims today, young Muslims today? And embedded within that question was something about the gap between science and religion, and how do you deal with that? You yourself as a Muslim neuroscientist, neuroscience PhD, done research, doing medicine now, like, how do you deal with that? And I wanted to give you guys a couple of ideas about that, or just give you some thoughts about it. Our biggest problem as Muslims today is that we have secularized our religion. And I don't mean that in a political sense. I mean that in a strict just division between religion and everything else. The colonial powers that be that came through the Muslim world and conquered and took over and took advantage of the resources. Part of the way that they've done things was to take over the education system and introduce a parallel education system in the Muslim world, because these people, when they took over when they colonized Muslim lands, they didn't do it haphazardly, and they weren't just blind about it. They studied Muslims and they noticed something about them. One thing about Muslims, if you look at all different nations, when they rise, they took a long time to rise and get into, power over the world. So the Romans, the Persians, any dynasty, any empire that rose, it took a long time for it to rise, but then its fall was very quick. And you can look at the work of people like Arnold Toynbee about that. Now, Muslims, on the other hand, were actually a unique case, historically speaking, where they rose very quickly. Within 100 years, Muslims went from Bedouins and tribes scattered throughout the desert into literally rulers of the world. They were contentious in the sense that you have to contend with them as an empire, and they took over and they were defeating people, and they were organized in institutions and things, and all of that happened within a 100-year span. Their fall, though, wasn't that quick. The fall of Muslims took a very long time. It was a very, very slow decline, and even throughout the decline there were periods of revival where they would come back up and they would take over again and they would go back to their roots. Now, the question from a colonialist's perspective is why? How is that happening? What's going on with Muslims that allows them to, in their decline, have these periods of revival? And where are these periods of revival coming from? Now, if you look at where they're coming from, they're usually coming, always actually, not usually, they're always coming out of the masajid. They're always coming out of the mosques. And if you happen to be blessed enough and lucky enough to go around and travel the world and check out old mosques, and I'm talking about not like decrepit, destroyed mosques. I'm talking about big, huge historical mosques. An example would be like the mosque in Al-Qarawiyyin, in Masjid Al-Qarawiyyin. I believe that's in Fas. If you look at the way that masjid, that mosque is designed, and the rooms that are in it, it's not just a mosque where you just go and pray. It's a mosque where it has an observatory in it. It has also like an anatomy room in it where people would go and study medicine at the time. That's where they would study it. It has all of these different areas where people were, if they want to study, it wasn't just a matter of let's go memorize the Quran and study tafsir and hadith and seerah and Arabic and that's it. It was an all-encompassing thing. So they would go and study a lot of different things together. And so the way that Islamic studies were conducted were holistic in nature. They were not divided up. If you look at the modern way of studying Islam, it's devoid from context. It's devoid from the world. It's basically go to a seminary, or even if you don't go to a seminary, when you study your text, there is hardly any context given to it. You just go and study whatever it is that it is to be studied from a historical perspective. You focus on the ritual aspect of the religion and all of the things that relate to your interactions. There's always this tension and back and forth where you feel like, well, what place does Islam have in the world today? That's not the way of the predecessors. The predecessors involved everything together. And so when people speak about the gap between science and religion, this gap is a manufactured gap produced by the secularization of religious teaching for Muslims, where our Islam, if you look at the way that the rise of Islamic sciences, and this is one thing that a lot of, I hear, when I hear people talk about this, I can't help but find myself thinking, do you really feel that much of an inferiority complex that you have to prove to people the validity of your religion or the truth of Islam by resorting to these things? And what I'm talking about here is when people talk about the golden age of Islam, oh, Muslims discovered the scientific method, Muslims were doing science. They weren't doing science in the sense that you think they were doing science. When you look at science today and modern science today, the reductive science, the science that atomizes things, the science that looks at the parts and pretends like they equal the whole, that's not the science that Muslims were engaged in. In fact, the very advent, the very development of science, the root of it, why did Muslims begin to do science in the first place? It's not the same reason. If you look at Francis Bacon, what was Francis Bacon's thing? It's a famous statement that he made about science and what the aim of science is for. It's to subject nature. It's to take nature and subject it to the powers of the human being. You learn about it so that you can exploit it. That's not the science that Muslims were engaged in. The way that Muslims engage in science, the seed of it was actually religious motivation. So if you look at the introduction, for example, to the book on algebra by Al-Khwarizmi, those of you who can read Arabic, go online, pull up the PDF, read the introduction. And it's fascinating to see, why did Al-Khwarizmi develop the discipline of algebra in the first place? Why did he put together that book and introduce algebra to the world, to the bane of everybody's existence afterwards, and the pains that they have to go through in their high school? Why did he do algebra? In the introduction, he notes that it was the Khalifa, the ruler at the time, instructed him, hey, Al-Khwarizmi, I'm told that you are the mathematician, you're the whiz kid on the block. We have a problem with inheritance laws. Our inheritance laws in Islam are quite complex. They can get quite complex, especially with extended families and big families and such. We need to develop a tool. We need to have a way of calculating the inheritance in a way that is authentic to the tradition, is authentic to Islam, and obeys the rulings of the Quran about this, and at the same time facilitates it. It's easier for us to go through. So Al-Khwarizmi, go on and do this. So that was the driving force. That's why he started doing that. Why did Muslims engage in astronomy? What was the main reason for it? What was the purpose behind engaging in astronomy and doing observatories and things like that? Prayer times, fasting. When you build a state, when you start to develop, you have a population and you have institutions now and you have a government that's gotten big and you have things to tend to and life basically. So you're no longer this Bedouin or tribe or small city that's agricultural based and you're just, it's easy for you to just employ one person. Hey, go on top of the minara and just observe the shadows. And you can't do that anymore when you have a big complex state. So you have to develop tools to facilitate for people. It's the same issues that we deal with today. I need to know when the prayer times are so that I can organize my day around them. I need to know when Ramadan is. I need to know when Eid is potentially going to fall on and Ramadan is going to fall on these days so that I can organize my schedule accordingly with regards to work or study or whatever it is that I've engaged in, so that I can organize my life, because as my life becomes more complex, I need to have a schedule for it to make it work. So that was the initial impetus for why Muslims got engaged in astronomy in the first place. If you look at the Quran itself, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, they ask you about the moon phases. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ. The companions were asking the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the moon phases, and their question was not a question of why, it was a question of how. They were asking the Prophet ﷺ, well, can you explain to us how these moon phases are taking place and what's going on? And they were asking for a mechanism. They were asking a scientific question. The answer came back in the Quran with, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ وَالْحَجِّ. They ask you about the moon phases, tell them it is for you to keep track of time for what? For the sacred months, for the Ramadan, for Hajj, for the pilgrimage. That's the purpose of these things. So the companions were given the purpose behind the moon phases, which is to keep track of time. As for discovering how the moon phases themselves actually come about and what takes place and between the difference in location around the earth and the sun and its relative positions and such, all of that stuff, that's open to anybody to discover. You don't need revelation to tell you. So that was the start of it. It's amazing to think that people ask, at least me anyways, they ask me about the gap between religion and science. Well, the very reason Muslims got engaged in science was to fulfill religious duties and obligations. And as they fulfilled them and as they served that purpose, the interest was sparked now to engage in more investigations and more studies. Now, if you live in a world where your worldview, your particular perspective on the world, is a world full of God, in a sense of, I always repeat this hadith because it's so important. It has implication to your approach to everything. أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. That to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to worship God Almighty as if you see Him, and if you don't see Him, you recognize that He sees you. That hadith, Hadith Jibreel, is a hadith about metaphysical worldview, your cosmology, your belief about the world and your place in it. So when you worship God as if you see Him, and if you don't see Him, you recognize He sees you, the way you interact with the world is going to be one with that recognizes the power that you've been given through free will, and at the same time the servanthood that you should display. So you do not engage in scientific investigations to gain control and power over nature. You're already told in the Quran that nature has been subjugated to you. The intellect and free will, your ability to engage in contemplation and understand the data that you attain, and having free will in the sense that now you can engage, you can do something with that information. The world is already subjugated to you. You can do a lot of things with it. What we've been showing the world is, and what we've been exercising over the past at least couple of 100 years now, is how miserably failing we are at it. We are destroying the world, and there's nothing. I mean, it's quite amazing. I'm more freaked out, personally speaking, if you think about what scares, if you ask me, what scares you more, with regards to temporal things in the world, what is the one thing that scares you the most? The one thing that scares me the most is climate change. Bombs and all of this stuff, you have these concerns about them and stuff, but terrorism, people talk about terrorism and random violence and all of that stuff. Yeah, you have these things in the back of your mind, but at the end of the day, it's like, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. But for some reason, I have this trepidation, I have this concern with regards to climate change, and every year, when I look at the changes happening in the environment, and when spring enters, and when winter enters, and the heat waves, and the snowstorms that are happening in different places in the world, and how the climate is changing, and the water, and I mean, when I look at all of these things, and there's something about this that just freaks me out. And it's not necessarily the danger for our lives per se. It's because I find myself automatically going back to وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. That when your Lord has declared unto the angels, I'm going to put upon this earth a vicegerent, a representative, somebody who's supposed to be responsible for this earth and is going to be asked about it. It freaks me out to think about, what are we going to say when we're asked about what we did to this earth? I mean, even in the Quran, there's another verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. That corruption has become manifest in the earth, in the land, and in the seas because of what people have been earning. And I believe it was Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, and he's the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, commenting on this verse, and he said that you're going to see the fish diminish. There'll be no more fish in the sea, and that's actually what we're seeing today. So you want to talk about gaps between science and religion. You want to talk about what is the biggest challenge that we have. The biggest challenge that we have is that we're not teaching this religion in a way that is holistic, and in a way that promotes development of a cosmological worldview that recognizes our position in the world and what we're supposed to be doing in it. Now, one of the biggest problems that we have, and I know this firsthand because I've taught classes on basic theology, just teaching young Muslims why we believe what we believe, not necessarily what we believe, but why we believe it. I think the Aqidah Tahawiyya has its place. It's a nice, good text to go through, and it has these just articles of faith. What do Muslims believe? And it goes into the details. It's obviously Muslims believe in the 5 pillars, but Aqidah Tahawiyya goes into this kind of more detailed, like, all right, so according to Sunnis, like, what are the things that we believe in? But that just tells you what? It doesn't tell you why. So you have young Muslims that would take the Tahawiyya, they would memorize the Quran, they would study some hadith, then they would go to college and take a class in biology, and all of a sudden, they have all of their faith shaken up. Or they take a class in philosophy and they have their faith shaken up. And make no mistake about it, when you go and study at any university, and this is another problem that it's these words, man, it's like in the words of Dave Chappelle, it's the age of spin. Do not think that by you avoiding classes of philosophy that you've avoided philosophy. There is no such thing as value-free education. All education is built upon a cosmological worldview, a metaphysical worldview. Western education is built on the premise that God does not exist and God has no place in this world and it's all about us. So from that, you're going to teach certain values. It's not, people think like, oh, we're just in science, we're just teaching you facts. There's no such thing as value-free facts that you're just going to teach. There's no such thing as just, I'm going to tell you the facts without telling you a story. These facts are irrelevant. I've mentioned in a previous podcast the difference between fact and myth, and how a story gets developed around these facts to give you a coherent story based on these facts so that you can have some sort of a belief about it. I can't just come in and tell you some mathematical formulations and numbers and data. They mean nothing to you. I have to give you a story along with it. What is this story going to come from? That story is going to come from my cosmological worldview. So a lot of our young Muslims, when they go into college, university, study, even if they don't take philosophy, they're imbibing a philosophical worldview. So it doesn't matter if they memorize the Quran, they've done all of these things. Don't be surprised when they come out and they're atheists all of a sudden. It's not because, oh, you've saved them by making them memorize the Quran. You need to explain, why are you a Muslim? That's not to say that it is absolutely obligatory upon everyone to explain why they're a Muslim or their Islam is invalid. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that if you're going to put yourself in a position, and I really am going towards the side of this has got to be a fard ayn now. It's no longer enough for you to just have very basic understanding of Islam. You have to understand, especially in an education setting, to a little bit more of a sophisticated degree, why are you a Muslim? It's not sufficient for you to be born into a Muslim family and just have these things taught to you and then you just engage in them in a ritualistic way. You have to have a rational, contemplative understanding of why you believe what you believe. So the Aqidah Tahawiyya, as good as it is not good enough for this now. You have to study things like, I would say, begin with something basic like the Creed of Deliverance, Aqidatul Najat. I've uploaded a recording of a series that I was teaching before, and I uploaded down on YouTube. So for those of you who want to go listen to it, you can go listen to it over there. There's also a playlist on SoundCloud. But aside from that one, you should also study like Al-Aqidah Nasafiyya, Aqidat al-Sanusi, Jawharat al-Tawheed, Imam al-Laqani. You have to find teachers in your locality who you can sit with and find teachers who understand how to deliver this information using contemporary language. So not just a didactic, memorize these lines and just repeat after me, but more like, all right, so this is what the author says, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. This has this particular relevance in our time today. So when you hear this particular scientist say such and such, this is why it is irrational, or this is why it doesn't make sense, or this is why it's incoherent, and it's based on these rational constructs. So it's not blind faith, it's a rational faith, where you understand where the logical fallacies and equivocations are taking place on the side of the atheist, who is not just talking about science, but now they're promoting a worldview. And you now can learn how to distinguish between what is science from a factual perspective and what is the myth that is constructed around it. So they talk about asatirul awwaleen. They try to accuse us, believers, that you guys believe in these old myths and fairy tales. There is a modern fairy tale that is woven around the facts. And this fairy tale is based on a cosmological worldview that says God doesn't exist and the universe has always existed, or the universe brought itself into existence from non-existence, or whatever the case may be. And you need to understand what the problem with these things, you need to understand what the terms that I'm using right now actually mean, and how they are operationalized and how they're utilized, so that you understand how to defend yourself intellectually if you get into that position. When a lot of young Muslims go through college, university, and find themselves developing doubts, these doubts have two components. The first component is an intellectual component, and that intellectual component is a product of cognitive dissonance. You were taught certain things before you entered into university. And these things were about, some of them historical, about Adam and Eve alayhim salam, for example, about Nuh alayhi salam, about the people of Thamud and Ad and all of these things. So you were taught certain things. And you weren't given much more explanation than just the facts of it. And then some other things with regards to practice, some things with regards to the seerah. And then you go into college and university and you start to learn things that contradict that. But you don't understand, you were never really taught how to deconstruct these things. And understand, first of all, why did you believe in the first place all of these things that you were told before? And what is the problem with the things that you're being taught now? And what were the problems with the things you were being taught before? I mean, you have to have this kind of balance between the two worlds, where you understand where your blind spots may have been, what you could accept, what is equivocal. It's neither here nor there for you. It doesn't matter. What is essential, theologically speaking, and on the college side, what is just myth and what is fact? How do you distinguish between the two of them? You're not given these tools. You don't know how to engage with these things. It's almost like somebody engaged in you could go into any factory, for example, and you get told, do this, do that, and that's it. And you don't get explanations. But then when things start to go wrong in the factory, you have no idea how to fix it, because you don't understand how things started off in the first place. And you don't know how to get them back into that original state so that everything is working harmoniously. So you end up panicking and you don't know what to do. So you either try to do something and mess it up even more, or you just escape with the clothes on your back and just let the factory burn if it goes down to that. So that's kind of what's going on with a lot of young Muslims when they enter into these post-secondary institutions. They were not given the intellectual tools to engage properly with all of these things. So you have to be given the tools first of all. But that's why you have this intellectual part of doubt. The second part is an emotional part, and that part is so powerful. That part is more powerful than you give it credit for. And it is what Jonathan Haidt, which we talked about his book, The Righteous Mind, but he's got other books. He's a psychologist from New York University. And he talks about the rider and the elephant. And the elephant is your emotional decision-making capacity. If you don't train your elephant, the elephant will take the rider, who is you, anywhere it wants to go. So your emotional state will take you anywhere it wants to go, and what you end up engaging in is a bunch of rationalizations for why you decided to behave in the way that you behave and declare the things that you declare. A lot of guys and girls, even when you're going into college, you're in your late teens, early 20s, these are very crucial years. You're still intellectually, your physique, your body may have grown into whatever it's going to grow into, and then it's downhill from there. But you haven't reached your peak intellectual development yet. You're still maturing intellectually. You're still trying to work things out. And that's why this age between, let's say 17 to 24, 25 years old, that's the most turbulent age for a lot of people. And so that's when they start to figure out who they are and discover what they believe, what they don't believe in, all of these things. So they take that period, combine it with this environment of not just intellectual challenges, but also emotional challenges. A lot of people fall in love at that time. A lot of people want to, I mean, if you go into an environment that's predominated with people that party all the time and just quote unquote have fun all the time, and you as a Muslim, you've been raised with all of these expectations of you can't do this, you can't go drinking, you can't do that, you can't do that. And so you, at first, you might want to resist all of these things, but then if you surround yourself with a group of people who basically, whose idea of college years is to behave in these ways that are now known, I mean, I don't have to get into the details of it, what eventually happens is that your emotional ammo wears out. You know, you just run out, you empty out, and so you start wanting to engage in actions and behaviors that you didn't think you would before. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi falyanzur ahadukum man yukhalil." The individual is going to be upon the religion, and the way to interpret that, upon the way of his khalil. And khalil in Arabic, think of your fingers interlocking. So people that you surround yourself with to that degree, and if you have a group of people, and there's psychology research now that shows pretty unequivocally that you as an individual are not going to overpower the group, no matter how strong your personality is. So with enough people, you're going to find yourself wanting to engage in the activities that they engage in. Otherwise, you will feel left out. You will feel a little bit weird that, oh my God, I'm not, am I being antisocial? I'm not really having fun. All of them are doing this. So now your elephant is taking you in a direction. And you already have this intellectual issue, this cognitive dissonance of, I'm learning all of these things and I don't have answers for why they contradict with what I believe, and they seem to be presented to me in a way that's factual. These are true things. It describes the reality of the world. So how am I going to be able to come to a resolution with regards to this? So you combine these two things and you got fire. Now you have somebody who wants to conform, socially speaking, and has intellectual doubts. What happens when you put these two things together in a pot and stew them? You come up with rationalizations. And that's why don't be surprised when you hear some really crazy numbers of like 50% of Muslims in college are drinking and partying and doing all these things. It's even more than that. These are just people that are reporting to you. Don't be surprised by that. I remember just, in my graduation, Muslim names that are just being called out to go into the stage, and it's like, subhanallah, all of these are Muslims. I didn't know, like you wouldn't even know it. But such is the world. You were raised in a family setting that never taught you why you are the way that you are, why you believe the things that you believe. Then you go into, and then you live in a setting and you engage in, you have company that basically socially you find yourself wanting to conform with. Combine that with intellectual trauma that you're going to experience when you start college, and it's not just college, by the way. All of this, the philosophical foundations of education, this begins from even the youngest ages. We're talking kindergarten, preschool, grade 1, all of that. There's a philosophy that's being built. So you got a kid that's growing 18 years in an education setting, 12 years of education from primary all the way to finish high school, and then they go into college where it's a culmination of it. Now they're going to have even more of it at a more sophisticated level. Then you find the parents all of a sudden. I get messages, and it's heartbreaking. I get messages through Facebook, email, just through the contact on Andalus Online, and people asking me, like, can you talk to my son? Can you talk to my daughter? They're having doubts about this and that. I was like, man, you can't come to me all of a sudden after years and years of developing a foundation that is basically materialistic and atheistic, and then expect it to be dealt with in a single message or in a single phone call. I mean, it could happen. It could definitely happen. But you have to work on this a bit longer, and you have to be more proactive with your kids and the youth when you speak with them. so that you can have them build this foundation so they can intellectually deal with all of this, all of these challenges. Anyway, when that discussion comes out, I'll give you guys a shout out on Twitter, just to share the link with it, because I think it was an interesting discussion. Maybe it will be beneficial to some of you. But yeah, today is going to be just a short one because I gotta get to sleep, man. I got this podcast going on really early, this webinar. So yeah, Twitter, my handle is Mohammed Ghilan, MohamedGhilan, and you can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and AndalusOnline.org. If you want to become a supporter of this work and if you find benefit in it, please, you can do this in 2 ways, well, 3 ways. The first way is at no financial cost to you, which is spread the word. If you can let more people know about it, I'd really appreciate it. The second way is, second and third way is financial. You can either become a patron, so you can go to patreon.com/Mohammed Ghailan and pledge something, $1, $2, $3, whatever you can. All of this helps with producing this content. Or you can join, which I prefer you do, because you'll get more out of it, is AndalusOnline.org. Join the book club, Andalus Book Club. We've got webinars going on every month. We've got books that we discuss, member exclusive content with videos and things that I teach there. So far we've got commentary on Imam al-Ghazali's Deliverance from Error. It's a 3-part series that I've got up there now. What else do I have up there? Philosophy of Science and Introduction is up there. Webinars from all of the different books that we've discussed. And I'm actually also recording another thing in the coming days here with philosophical mistakes. So maybe that will be beneficial for you guys. And that's it, man. Check me back again next week, inshallah. Keep us in your prayers. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.